So my policy paper was on the plight of the undocumented student in higher education. It's one of the top five policy issues in America today, in regards to higher education, and it was something that, as a college advisor, that I wanted to know more about. So what does it mean to be undocumented? Well, basically, it just means that you're living in the United States without legal documents. Uh, People have entered the U.S. without inspection or with fraudulent documents, or entered legally with the visa but then violated the terms of that visa. So, what does that actually look like? Well, here's an example. We have Carlos who came with his family to visit America on a family tourist visa, and then it expired, and they overstayed their time in America. So he then entered the public school system in second grade. As he grew up, he became bilingual. He identifies as a Mexican American, and his goal is to one day be an aeronautics engineer. Another example is Marissa. She arrived to America at 3 years old with no legal documents, attended the American K through 12 public education system, is a Filipina American, and her goal is to be a pediatrician. And Marissa did not even know she was undocumented until she tried to go to college, because America is the only home that she had ever known. So, some American facts is that there are 55 million immigrants since the Revolutionary War, and with the exception of Native Hawaiians, Native Alaskans, Native Americans, basically the U.S. is a country built on immigration. So there's 11.2 million undocumented immigrants, 2 million undocumented students, and about 65,000 who are contributing citizens who live in fear of deportation. In Hawaii, we have about 25,000 unauthorized workers. 2 billion in revenues are generated from this demographic, 1 million in gross state product, and they comprise 3% of our state population. So this is actually a significant demographic that we have to address here, even in our own state. So, what place do undocumented students have in the American higher education system? Well, to be honest, they can be admitted to most private universities. If you're undocumented, you, however, are classified as an international student, and so you're subject to intense admissions protocol, and the tuition costs are astounding, pretty much very unaffordable for the undocumented student, and there is no federal financial aid that they can apply for. So the debate is access and affordability in higher education for the undocumented student. So there's different ramifications looking at social, political, and economic considerations. There are those who are advocates for undocumented students having access and affordability to colleges, and there are those who oppose it. Those who are advocates say that these undocumented students are American in everything but papers, and that they're victims of circumstance, and oftentimes the victims of um, their parents' decisions. If we support them through college, then they will contribute to our economy. It'll promote an educated workforce, because for most of them, America is the only home they've ever known. And so it's very unlikely that they're going to return to to a native country. And so allowing them the opportunity to become educated, because they are going to stay in America, will only help our general population, and also will then contribute to less prison and welfare costs in the long run. Those in opposition of undocumented students having access to higher education is that they're saying there's not even enough resources for legal citizens. They say it's unfair to citizens or those that have gone through the rigorous immigration process. It drains our funds, and ultimately, they're here illegally. So it's an illegal act, and therefore, we shouldn't be supporting them in their college endeavors. So this has been something that has been a part of American history for a really long time. Immigration law has been a part of the American political system since the country's birth, and there was the first legislation in around 1790. Since then, there's been dozens of laws and amendments passed in Congress to determine who is eligible to work, enter, and sponsor others for U.S. citizenship. There's been a lot of activity, especially in the last 70 years. For instance, in 1965, the Higher Education Act required federal financial aid applicants to be legal U.S. residents. 1982, Plyler versus Doe, the U.S. Supreme Court mandated that states provide all persons in the United States access to a K through 12 education, whether they are undocumented or documented. But in 1996, there is two acts: Personal Work Responsibility Act and Illegal Immigration Reform and Immigration Responsibility Act. And these talked about issues for federal financial aid and what they call post-secondary benefits, or like in-state tuition. So the Personal Work Responsibility Act talked about unqualified aliens not being eligible for federal benefits or in-state tuitions. And then the Illegal Immigration Reform and Immigration Responsibility Act talked about undocumented immigrants not being eligible for in-state tuition unless a documented non-resident gets the same benefits. So the idea is if you're going to offer in-state tuition to someone who's undocumented, then you need to offer it to documented people that are out of state as well. So that was one thing. Then there's also in 2012, Obama initiated DACA, the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals Program, which allows temporary legal protection but not legal status to the undocumented students. They can get work permits without fear of deportation, and then that way they can continue with their educational goals. One of the most controversial pieces of legislation has been the DREAM Act, or the Development, Relief, and Education for Alien Minors. Um, this DREAM Act has been something that has been on the table since 2001. That's when it was first introduced, and the purpose was to authorize in state tuition, temporary residency, and actually provide a pathway to permanent legal residency for undocumented students. Um, it was reintroduced several times over the past 10 years, and the latest that it was reintroduced was in 2011, but it still failed to gain full support of Congress. And to date, there are no plans to reenact this piece of legislation in the near future. So, given an absence of a strong federal mandate, it then falls to each of the individual states to figure out what are they going to do when it comes to affordability and access for their undocumented students in their own states. So, what is everybody doing? Well, the green dots indicate those states that support undocumented students in higher education, and it varies greatly state to state. So, when we say supporting these students, they either provide state financial aid or access to at least community colleges, or they provide in-state tuition. So it varies greatly state to state. The red dots indicate those states that don't allow in-state tuition, and in some cases actually prevent admission to colleges even at the community college level, which is interesting since community colleges are built on the idea that they are open access institutions. They are open, they accept all. And yet, even in some of these states, community college access is denied to the undocumented student. If you look at North Carolina, there's a big question mark there because they've gone back and forth changing their college admission policies about 5 times in a 10-year period. And then Texas is, though it's normally been in support of undocumented students, they're threatening to clamp down on the admissions and tuition policies for this demographic. So, what about Hawaii? What's been happening here? Currently, there is no Hawaii state law. Legislation has not been passed, though it's been introduced several times throughout the past 15 years. And the UH system then decided to enact policy since there was nothing at the state level that was mandated. So UH system took a stand and on February 21st, 2013 enacted BOR policy 6.209 on undocumented students, where undocumented students would be allowed access and admission to our colleges if they provided proof of physically residing in Hawaii for at least a year, attended a high school in America for at least 3 years, attained a high school diploma or equivalent, and filed or proved intent to file DACA or legal immigrant status. The benefits is admission to college, resident tuition rates, and that they would be eligible for state financial aid. So, was it in the best interest of Hawaii that the Board of Regents implemented UH policy? 6.209 undocumented students in the absence of legislation. The answer is a resounding yes. The idea is that this is their home too. Again, these are students that are often the victims of circumstance. They came to America based on their parents' decisions, not based on their own decisions. And this is the only home that they've known. This is the place that they intend to grow up and to contribute and to give back to. Because they're not leaving, it's an investment in our own state talent. And the whole idea behind education is that it's all about social justice, and allowing education should be something that is allowed to all. If anything, the only recommendation that I came up with is for this policy is to extend benefits to undocumented immigrants who are U.S. military vets or members of the U.S. Public Health Service. This would put the UH Manoa policy in line with other states that have similar policies. So, my reflection on this policy review is, what is the intent of a policy? That is one of the questions that I think you always have to ask yourself. What are we trying to do? Who is impacted by this? And are they impacted in the way that you want them to be impacted? And when you're looking at policy review, it also requires knowledge of literature, data analysis, and synthesis of best practices. There are cultural, socioeconomic, political, and historical contexts to be considered. And one of the things that I got out of this is that policy is a living mechanism. It's a window into the soul of our society where we highlight both good and bad, prejudices and biases, hopes and aspirations, and we do a temperature check. So even though the policy may not be what we want it to reflect, it is what is the current temperature, what's the current read on society at that time, and if we don't like it, then we should change it. And so that policy should be a living, breathing mechanism, that it's not stagnant, but it's always something that's going to be reflecting the values of that society. And that's my policy review.